Let's be real, Australia is a gigantic island. And like any island nation, its entire way of life, its whole economy, is completely tied to the sea. So what happens when a country that's built on maritime trade suddenly finds itself with almost no ships of its own? That's the huge paradox we're going to dig into.
Just think about it for a second. The fuel in your car, the phone in your pocket, pretty much everything that makes up modern life in Australia, it gets there on a ship. This constant flow of vessels coming in and out of the ports, well, it isn't just a part of the economy, it's the economy's absolute lifeblood.
And just look at the sheer scale of this dependence. We're not talking about like a simple majority here. Over 99% by weight of all of Australia's international trade comes by sea. For all practical purposes, that's everything. Okay, so keeping that 99% figure in your head, take a look at this number, 11. That's roughly how many major commercial ships, the ones that move all that critical stuff, actually fly the Australian flag. Just 11. For a country with the 5th largest shipping task in the world, that number is, frankly, just mind-boggling.
And right there, that is the central paradox. How can one of the world's great trading nations, a whole continent defined by its massive coastline, basically have a ghost fleet? So let's dig into how we got here and, more importantly, what it means for the country's security and its ability to bounce back from a crisis.
And this isn't just about stuff coming from overseas. Coastal shipping is like the hidden circulatory system for the entire continent. Think about moving iron ore from the west to the east, or getting fuel to all the towns dotted around that huge coastline. A lot of the time, the only way that makes sense is by sea.
And look, this isn't some abstract theoretical problem. The last few years have shown us exactly how fragile this whole system is. Remember when the pandemic just tangled up global shipping? Or when floods washed out the main rail line connecting the east and west coasts? That's when not having your own national fleet becomes painfully obvious. Because in a real crisis, there's no big red button you can press to make foreign-flagged ships do what you need them to do.
Now, this problem didn't just pop up overnight. To really get what's happening now, we've got to rewind the clock more than a decade to a huge reform package that was designed to fix this exact issue. It was a really ambitious plan, trying to turn the tide on a very long decline.
And this timeline, man, it just lays it all out. Just 30 years ago, there were over 100 Australian-flagged ships out there. That 2012 reform was a direct attempt to stop the bleeding, but as you can see, the slide just kept going, landing us right where we are today. So this 2012 plan, it was built on what looked like 4 really solid pillars. It had tax exemptions to try and make Australian shipping more competitive. It brought in a new licensing system to try and give local ships first dibs on coastal routes. It set up something called an international register to attract more ships to the flag. And it focused on training the next generation of Aussie seafarers. On paper, it looks like they had all the bases covered, right?
But, as we already know from that timeline, the plan didn't work. For all its good intentions and that seemingly comprehensive structure, it just slammed headfirst into the hard realities of the global shipping world. Okay, so the billion-dollar question is, what exactly went wrong? Why didn't this big, ambitious plan actually work? Well, a huge piece of the answer is right here. The absolute centerpiece of that whole reform was the Australian International Shipping Register, or AISR. The goal was to create this new, more competitive category to attract ships. The reality? Today, there are 0, not 1 ships registered on it. It was a complete and total failure. So why did it flop so badly? Well, there were a few big roadblocks. Australia just has higher operating costs and let's just say some pretty complex labor relations issues that make it tough to compete. But, and get this, a critical flaw was this one bizarre rule that said a ship on this new international register could only work in Australian waters for half the year. It basically made the whole thing commercially impossible from day one. So that brings us right back to today. We're facing an even smaller fleet and, arguably, even bigger supply chain risks. So the current government is giving it another shot with a new policy, the Maritime Strategic Fleet. So what is this strategic fleet? Well, the idea is pretty simple. The government would help pay for up to 12 privately owned, commercially run ships. They go about their normal business, but if there was a national emergency, like a massive natural disaster or a defense situation, the government would have the right to call on them for help. Think of it as a kind of reserve fleet. Now,
Obviously, nobody wants a repeat of the 2012 failure. So industry experts are basically shouting from the rooftops saying, look, if you want this to actually work, you have to fix the old problems. They're calling for real tax exemptions that can actually compete globally, getting rid of income tax for seafarers to help rebuild our skills base, and, critically, scrapping that ridiculous time-off-the-coast rule for good.
So, with a new plan on the table and some clear lessons from the past, we get to the big question. Is the tide finally turning for Australia's ghost fleet, or is the challenge of rebuilding a whole national capability like this just too big?
And I think this quote from Angela Gilham, who's the CEO of Maritime Industries Australia, really hits the nail on the head. She's saying that 12 ships are a fantastic start, and they are, but they're not going to solve the fundamental problem. It's a really important step in the right direction for sure, but it's not the final destination if you want real resilience for a nation like Australia.
So let's just pull it all together real quick. The core issue? The fleet size has collapsed to around 11 ships. The proposed solution? This new strategic fleet of 12. We've got a massive skills crisis, which you can only really fix by having more ships to train people on. And then there's the big one, competitiveness, which can only be solved with some serious tax and regulatory reform.
And at the end of the day, it really all boils down to this one simple question. In a world that seems to be getting more turbulent, for a nation that depends so completely on the sea, is having your own shipping capability just a nice-to-have choice, or has it become an absolute fundamental necessity?